and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to kind of start diving into a few different things to do with immigration and this extremism that is going on, that even if maybe you're a Muslim and say that doesn't go with what I believe in my Muslim religion, for a certain group of these people, they do look at it in religious ways as a religious holy war. So we have to keep that in mind. We can't just ignore that fact. And of course, I'm having an issue with Drudge right now, trying to get that to pull up. I have one here. Truth in Media, Michael Lofty. France will accept 30,000 more Syrian refugees after Paris attack. On Wednesday, French President François Hollande announced that France would still accept upwards of 30,000 Syrian refugees over the next 2 years, despite the recent ISIS terror attacks on Paris that left at least 129 dead. 30,000 refugees will be welcomed over the next 2 years. Our country has the duty to respect this commitment, said Hollande. Receiving a standing ovation, Hollande made the announcement while meeting with mayors from across France. We have to reinforce our borders while remaining true to our values, said Hollande, as he noted that it was France's humanitarian duty to honor their commitments to refugees. Meanwhile, the majority of American governors have called upon the federal government to not place Syrian refugees in their respective states. While President Obama has made attempts to paint the refusal of accepting refugees as a partisan issue driven by Republicans, a handful of states controlled by Democratic state legislators and governors have also demanded that no refugees be placed within their states, including Massachusetts, Maryland, which are considered the most democratic states in America. Quote, as governor of Maryland, the safety and security of Marylanders remain my first priority, said Maryland's Democratic Governor Larry Hogan. Following the terrorist attacks on Paris just 4 days ago, and after careful consideration, I am now requesting that federal authorities cease any additional settlements of refugees from Syria in Maryland until the U.S. government can provide appropriate assurances that refugees from Syria pose no threat to public safety. As on Tuesday, more than 24 governors issued statements saying that they would not be accepting refugees. Meanwhile, another half dozen say they will, but not without increased vetting. The move by these governors has created a constitutional crisis of sorts. Many, including President Obama, say that the states have no say in the matter. Meanwhile, others disagree and believe the issue may make its way to the Supreme Court. That out of Truth in Media. Now, one thing that I talked about last broadcast is I see the beginning of a world war, and I still stand by that. There is something brewing out there that we haven't seen, past generations haven't seen this type of financial and globalist power grabbing. You had the League of Nations, and then later became the UN. These were just beginnings of something that I start to see the beginning of, and part of beginning that type of situation is creating a crisis. And one issue we got, and being a libertarian, I'm for being able to cross borders. Our southern and northern borders at one point weren't this crazy lockdown situation, and we didn't have problems. Again, borders being a government thing, a lot of times, they'll ignore the good guys and wait for a crisis to happen to allow the bad guys in to further their agendas. But we're going to see this issue where, again, they're not opening the borders, they're controlling the borders. Many people tell you that the border, our northern border here in the United States, is more guarded than the southern border. And I think we're seeing an issue where a lot of the military and a lot of the police are waking up to it, where they're noticing it. A lot of good people are out there, and we're looking at, we have finally started to teeter towards that authoritarianism, and I think it's going to be the people in the military and the people in the law enforcement that are aware that are going to be the Paul Reveres. What we're also going to see is, with this crisis, with these threats that they will allow to come in, they will lock down the borders for you to get out. And these are things that you can look at past world wars and see, yeah, you got a passport or you got a visa, but now they're useless because you are inherently on lockdown. And then I think what happens at that point is the more authoritarian we would become at that point, the more Americans will recognize what, problems can cause people to want to leave their homes. And so we do have a catch-22 where, no, we shouldn't just be this, lockdown country. But problems have been created and allowed to happen, allowed to increase to the point now that if we don't, we're looking at even bigger problems. So, again, it becomes a catch-22. Now, I got a few clips I really want to get into this first hour. Let me go ahead and pull them up here. First, when it comes to ISIS, a lot of people talking about the U.S. government created ISIS. Here's a reality check, and this one's proof U.S. government wanted ISIS to emerge in Syria. This is Truth in Media, Ben Swan on YouTube, truthinmedia.com. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
Remains fixed on Paris. France is tonight a police state, and there is concern over ISIS infiltrating Syrian refugees. And of course, the big question, how can the world rid itself of the Islamic State? Now, before you listen to one more politician tell you what we need to do, you need to know what politicians knew about ISIS 3 years ago and the actions they took anyway. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else.
On the military front, our coalition is intensifying our airstrikes, more than 8,000 to date. We're taking out ISIL leaders, commanders.
There is no doubt the U.S. and its allies must stop ISIS. After the Paris attacks that left 129 dead, more than 350 people injured, and an entire nation in lockdown, there is no doubt that ISIS has to be stopped. Now, shortly after the Paris attack, ISIS fighters recorded this new video claiming they will soon strike the United States, including Washington, D.C. But look, there's no question that ISIS is a serious threat to people everywhere, especially to people in Iraq and in Syria who have been decimated by that terror group. In Syria alone, 9 million people have been displaced or fled the country, which makes what I'm about to share with you so infuriating. Well, 7 pages of a secret Pentagon document were leaked earlier this year, put online by the organization Judicial Watch. The report is from 2012, and specifically, it explains the dangers of what the U.S. government is doing in Syria at the time. Remember, in 2012, ISIS, as we know them today, did not exist. Page 3 of those leaked pages state 3 facts about the situation in Syria. A, internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction. B, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. And C, the West. Gulf countries and Turkey, they support the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. So to be clear, our Department of Defense in 2012 stated that the Russians, Chinese, and Iran were supporting the Assad regime, and that the United States and Gulf partners like Qatar and Saudi Arabia were supporting the opposition to Bashar al-Assad. But the DoD also made it clear that the major forces driving that opposition were the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and something called the Salafists. Now stay with me, because if you don't know the term Salafist, that movement is an ultra-conservative Orthodox movement within Sunni Islam. The doctrine is summed up as taking a fundamentalist approach to Islam. Sound familiar? Salafist is the same belief system as Wahhabism, from which ISIS draws their radical, violent, merciless beliefs. So now let's go back to that document. Because after reading page 5 in section 8C, the Department of Defense warns this, quote, if the situation unravels, there is a possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered a strategic depth of Shia expansion in Iraq and Iran. So what you need to know is that according to this leaked DoD report, opposition forces, the United States, the Saudis, Jordan, Qatar, and more, they wanted a Salafist or fundamental Islamic group to take over eastern Syria in order to isolate and overthrow the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad's regime. It was a plan to overthrow Assad, but 3 years later, Assad is still in power, and now the most violent, radical terror group in the modern world is entrenched in parts of Syria and Iraq, while exporting terror to Europe. So here's the real question. Why would we as the American public believe any politician who claims that they have a plan for what to do with ISIS when not one leader has ever acknowledged our role in the creation of that very problem? That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
Ben Swan on YouTube and truthofmedia.com. Now, alternative media is basically, most of alternative media is covering the fact that, you know, this is a group that basically was facilitated by the U.S. and allies. And they were creating a group that one of those allies, the Saudi Arabians, also politically and socially participate in, and that is the radical viewpoint, the how do you pronounce it? Wasabiism or Wahhabism. Yeah. It's I've been reading, you know, the a lot of these articles talking about it, and none of them talk about the belief system that also is aligned with that, where it comes down to the caliphate, and it also comes back to the Ottoman Empire, and how all of this is basically going also back into history and world wars and the alliance with Saudi Arabia. And I think we are now going to start to see, even with all the objection, the Western world collapse itself while also collapsing the Middle East. And I think a lot of them are naive to look at it, and they're looking at how could they benefit from all this, while not realizing, hey, they're not stopping with their caliphate in the Middle East. Again, it goes back to the caliphate, and it goes back to Abu Bakr from the 600s, and the Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and taking that first part of his name from that figure and believing in the caliphate, which stretches all the way across the Middle East, all the way across northern Africa, up through Spain, up through France. And then eventually across Europe. They want the whole Mediterranean. That's in their belief system that goes way back. And Abu Bakr of the 600 was, Muhammad's basically advisor. That after Muhammad died, he basically kind of became that next guy in line that went around preaching and spreading this belief in the caliphate that would stretch up through France and all that and across Europe. So, knowing the history starts putting a lot of dots together. But what's happening with the refugee, the immigration thing, that becomes more of the government control, the mechanism. I think there was also a lot of people that now are rejecting it, but before were for it because they were too naive to see these things coming down the line. And I think you will see some of the more left and right leaning ones that were still more nationalists being the extremist in America, because they are going to put it in the media that way. And we already seen the plans to do it. We already seen the bulletins out that say, you constitutionalists, Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, preppers, all these people should be, considered suspicious, basically. And we're going to see more of it when they allow the Western world to destabilize. And another thing that kind of sucks is if we go through this type of complete, power structure shifting to a point that makes it even worse than where we're at right now. The idea of freedom and liberty are going to seem so distant and so futuristic that it's going to be laughed at by a lot of these people that are already brainwashed. And a lot of these people have grown up in areas, usually big cities, that they've never had the chance to just kind of live free of intervention on every aspect of life. Cops are always behind you, it seems like, and you can't do this, you can't do that. Do you got a permit for that? You got a permit for that. When can't build a tree house for your kids, got a permit. Did you get that zoned? When people that haven't lived in big cities, go build. So, and we're also seeing that spread into a lot of areas that aren't big cities. So, it's getting more restrictive and more restrictive. Now, I want to get into this Lou Rockwell, and he talks about open borders and brings up Rothbard, and it's pretty interesting because a lot of people go, well, libertarians, that just means open borders. Well, the philosophy of liberty and freedom and borders and all that, it's been talked about. And again, when you have governments that have control over borders, it's not open borders, it's controlled borders, and it will be used to manipulate the population. That's my belief. But let's go ahead and get into this clip. Mises Media on YouTube, Open Borders, a libertarian reprisal, Lou Rockwell.
And so I'd like to introduce a person who's very well known to all of you, who runs maybe the most indispensable libertarian website on earth, LouRockwell.com, and also the founder and chairman of the Mises Institute, someone who's been at this for many, many decades and who's going stronger than ever, and someone to whom we all owe a lot, Lou Rockwell.
I want to talk about something controversial today, unlike everybody else. Talk about open borders, a libertarian reappraisal. Whether we're talking about illegal immigration from Mexico and Central America, or birthright citizenship, or the migrants coming from the Middle East and Africa, subject of immigration has been very much in the news and widely discussed for months now. It's an issue fraught with potentially perilous consequences, so it's especially important for libertarians to understand it correctly. This Mises Circle, which is devoted to considering where we go from here, seemed to me an opportune question. I should note that at the outset that in searching for the correct answer to this problem, I do not seek to claim any originality, of course. I draw much of what follows from two people whose work is indispensable to a proper understanding of the free society. That's Murray and Rothbard and Hans Hermann Hoppe. Some libertarians have assumed that the correct libertarian position on immigration must be open borders, or the completely unrestricted movement of peoples. Superficially, this appears correct. Surely we believe in letting people go wherever they want to go. But hold on a minute. Think about freedom of speech, another principle people associate with libertarians. Do we really believe in freedom of speech as an abstract principle? That would mean I have the right to yell during a movie, to disrupt a church service, the right to enter your home and shout obscenities at you. What we believe in instead are private property rights. No one has freedom of speech on my property, since I set the rules on my property. In the last resort, of course, I can expel someone. He can say whatever he likes on his own property or on the property of anyone who cares to listen to him, but not on mine. The same principle holds for the freedom of movement. Libertarians do not believe in any such abstraction in the abstract principle. I do not have the right to wander into your house, into your gated community, or onto Disney World, or onto Jay-Z's private island, or someone's private beach. As with freedom of speech, private property is the relevant factor here. I can move on to any property I myself own, or whose owner wishes to have me there, but I simply cannot go wherever I like. Now, if all the parcels of land in the world were held privately, the solution to the so-called immigration problem would be evident. In fact, there would be no immigration problem. Everyone moving somewhere new would have to have the consent of the owner of that place. When the state and its so-called public property enter the picture, though the things become slightly more murky, and it takes extra effort to uncover the proper libertarian position, I'd like to try to do that here today. Shortly before his death, Murray Rothbard wrote an article in the Journal of Libertarian Studies called Nations by Consent, Decomposing the Nation State. He'd begun rethinking the assumption that libertarians are committed to open borders. He noted, for instance, the large number of ethnic Russians whom Stalin had settled in Estonia. This was not done so the Baltic people could enjoy the fruits of diversity. In fact, it never is. It was an attempt to destroy an existing culture so that to make the people more docile and less likely to cause problems for the Soviet Empire. Murray wondered, as a libertarian, am I required to support this, much less to cheer it? Or might there be more to the immigration question after all? And here Murray posed the problem just as I have. In a really private property society, people would have to be invited onto whatever property they traveled through or settled on. If every piece of land in the country were owned by some person, group, or corporation, this would mean that no person could enter unless invited to enter and allowed to rent or purchase property. A totally privatized country would be as closed as the particular property owners wished it to be. It seems clear then that the regime of open borders that exists de facto in the United States and Western Europe today really amounts to a compulsory opening by the central state in charge of all streets and public lands, public buildings. It does not genuinely reflect the wishes of the proprietors. In the current situation, on the other hand, immigrants have access to public roads, public transportation, public buildings, and so on. Combine this with the state's other curtailments of private property rights, and the result is artificial demographic shifts that would never occur in a free market. Property owners are forced to associate and do business with individuals they might otherwise avoid. Quote, commercial property owners such as stores, hotels, and restaurants are no longer free to exclude or restrict access as they see fit, wrote Hans. Employers can no longer hire or fire whom they wish. In the housing market, landlords are no longer free to exclude unwanted tenants. Furthermore, restrictive covenants are compelled to accept members and actions in violation of their very own rules and regulations. Hans continues, by admitting someone onto its territory, the state also permits this person to proceed on public roads and lands to every domestic resident's doorstep, to make use of all public facilities and services, such as hospitals and schools, and to access every commercial establishment, employment, and residential housing protected by a multitude of non-discrimination laws. It is rather unfashionable to express concern for the rights of property owners in such situations. I know, and indeed I can already hear, the sympathy for migrants expressed by left libertarians, but whether the principle is popular or not, a transaction between two people should not occur unless both of those people want it to. This is, after all, the very core of libertarian principle. In order to make sense of all this and to reach the appropriate libertarian conclusion, we have to look more closely on what public property really is and who, if anyone, can be said to be its true owner. Hans has devoted some of his own work to this question. There are two positions, he says, we must reject. The first is that public property is owned by the government, that public property is unowned and is therefore comparable to land in the state of nature before individual property titles, particular parcels of land, have been established. Certainly we cannot say that public property is owned by the government, since government may not legitimately own anything. Government acquires its property by force, usually via the intermediary of taxation. A libertarian cannot accept that land or property acquisition is morally legitimate, like if it's done by force, since it involves, again, the initiation of force against the innocent through the extraction of tax dollars. Hence, government's pretended property titles are illegitimate. But neither can we say that public property is unowned. Property in the possession of a thief is not unowned, even if at the moment it does not happen to be held by the rightful owner. The same goes for so-called public property. It was purchased and developed by means of money seized from the taxpayers. They are the true owners. This, incidentally, was the correct way to approach desocialization in the former Soviet regimes in Eastern Europe. All these industries were the property of the people who had been looted to build them. And these people should have received shares in proportion to their contributions to the extent it would have been possible to determine those. In an anarcho-capitalist world, with all private property owned, immigration would be up to each individual property owner to decide. Right now, on the other hand, immigration decisions are made by a central authority. The wishes of property owners are completely disregarded. The correct way to proceed, therefore, is to decentralize decision-making on immigration to the lowest possible level, so we approach more meticulously and closely the proper libertarian position in which individual property owners consent to the various movements of peoples. Ralph Raico, our great libertarian historian, once wrote, "Free immigration would seem to be on a different category than other policy decisions, in that its consequences permanently and radically alter the very composition of the democratic political body that makes those decisions." In fact, he said, the liberal order, wherein to the extent it exists, is the product of a highly complex cultural development. One wonders, for instance, what would become of the liberal society of Switzerland under a regime of open borders. Switzerland, in fact, is an interesting example. Before the European Union was involved, the immigration policy of Switzerland approached the kind of system we are describing here. In Switzerland, localities decided on immigration and immigrants, or their employers had to pay to admit a prospective immigrant. In this way, residents could better assure that their communities would be populated by people who would add value and who would not stick them with a laundry list bill of benefits. Obviously, in a pure open border system, the Western welfare states would simply be overrun by people seeking tax dollars. As libertarians, we should, of course, celebrate the demise of the welfare state. But to expect a sudden devotion to laissez-faire to be the likely outcome of such a collapse in the welfare state is to indulge in naivete of an especially preposterous kind. Can we conclude that immigrants should be considered invited by the mere fact that they have been hired by an employer? No, says Hans, because the employer does not assume the full cost associated with his new employee. The employer partially externalizes the cost of that employee on the tax-paying public. Hans says, equipped with a work permit, the immigrant is allowed to make free use of every public facility, roads, parks, hospitals, schools, and no landlord, businessman, or private association is permitted to discriminate against him as regards housing, employment, accommodation, and association. That is, the immigrant comes invited with a substantial fringe benefit package, paid for not only partially by the immigrant's employer, who allegedly has extended the invitation, but by domestic proprietors as taxpayers who had no say whatsoever in the invitation. These migrations, in short, are not market outcomes. They would not occur on a free market. What we are witnessing are examples of subsidized immigration. Libertarians defending these mass migrations as if they were market phenomena are only helping to discredit and undermine the true free market. Moreover, as Hans points out, the free immigration position is not analogous to free trade, as some libertarians have erroneously claimed. In the case of goods being traded from one place to another, there was always and necessarily a willing recipient. The same is not true for free immigration. To be sure, it is fashionable in the U.S. to laugh at words of caution about mass migration. Why? People made predictions about previous waves of immigration, we're told, and we all know those didn't come true. Now, for one thing, those waves were all followed by swift and substantial immigration reductions, during which time society adapted to these pre-welfare state population movements. There is virtually no prospect of any such reduction today. For another, it is a fantasy to claim because some people incorrectly predicted a particular outcome at a particular time. Therefore, that outcome is impossible, and anyone issuing words of caution is simply a fool. Fact is, politically enforced multiculturalism has an exceptionally poor track record. The 20th century affords failure after predictable failure, whether it's Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, Pakistan and Bangladesh, or Malaysia and Singapore. By the countless places where ethnic and religious divides have not yet been resolved to this day, the evidence suggests something very different from the tale of the universal brotherhood of man that is such a staple of leftist folklore. No doubt some of the new arrivals are perfectly decent people, despite the U.S. government's lack of interest in encouraging immigration among the skilled and the capable. But some will not be. The three great crime waves in U.S. history, which began in 1850, 1900, and 1960, coincided with periods of mass migration. Migration may not have been the only factor at work, but it was indeed a factor. Crime isn't the only reason people may legitimately wish to resist mass immigration. If 4 million Americans showed up on the shores of Singapore for admission, that country's culture and society would be changed forever. And no, it's not true that libertarianism would require that the people of Singapore shrug their shoulders and say, well, it was nice to have our own society, but all good things must come to an end. No one in Singapore would want that outcome, and in a free society, they would actively prevent it. In other words, it's bad enough to be looted, spied on, and kicked around by the state. Should we also have to pay for the privilege of cultural destructionism, an outcome the vast majority of the state's tax-paying subjects do not want and would actively prevent if they lived in a free society and were allowed to do so? The very cultures that the incoming migrants are said to enrich us and the Europeans with could not have developed had they been constantly bombarded with waves of immigration by peoples of radically different cultures. So the multicultural argument doesn't even make sense. It's impossible to believe that the US or Western Europe would be a freer place after several more decades of uninterrupted mass migration on welfare. Given the migration patterns that the US and the EU government encourage, the long-term result will be to make constituencies for continued government growth so large as to be practically unopposable. Open borders libertarians active at that time may scratch their heads and claim not to understand why their promotion of free markets is having so little effect. Everyone else, I would argue, will understand why. Thank you.
Mises.org, Mises Media on YouTube, and that was Lou Rockwell. Now, what you might not know is this was actually November 7th. It was published on the 16th, but this took place in Phoenix, Mises Circle in Phoenix, on November 7th. So it's pretty amazing when you look at people like Rothbard and others, and the philosophy behind a lot of the libertarian ideology. Yeah, we are for the open border, the free exchange, but that doesn't happen under the state because the state controls a border, and a lot of times when they allow them in, it becomes a whole problem to regulate those people that they let in, let alone the people that, cross the border, what we call illegally. And then we end up having a welfare state to take care of all these people. And that's why, in a free market, without the government intervention, the laissez-faire with, exchange and stuff, most people would be like, we're not going to pay for this person to come here. That person is not going to have a free place to go when they come here because they don't have the means to pay for that, whether it be cash or labor. You just don't get a free ride. But under that too, more people would be able to prosper. Regulations wouldn't be like they are. more people would be like, yeah, we need the immigrant help. And there's also more of a vetting because you're taking a personal, approach to it. So you're going to have more of a personal, or people that work with these others are going to have a more personal experience with those other people. It's really complicated until you really get down to the roots of what freedom is and how to secure freedom. And it has a lot to do with the welfare of you and your family, and understanding how that relates to society and community. The people that believe different religions can't promote something that they wouldn't want their neighbor to do to them. You can't go, well, we don't like the Christians, but it's okay for this group or that group. Because it'll turn around and bite you in the butt. And that really is what the basis of freedom comes down to, and how society can be free. And it is through acceptance and allowing communities to have cultures. And culture will, evolve. But when you play these forced, controlled borders, and then forced immigration, basically, when they tell states you're going to take these immigrants, and there's no assimilation into the culture of that society, because a lot of times there are groups of them that, well, I don't know really anything about where I'm going other than I got a cousin there, or uncle, or friends. This is where I need to go. This address, I got their phone number. That's it. There's no want to assimilate, because they're just coming here to, I need to make some money because my family back home. Or, again, you will have false flags in the means of knowing that there is a problem, knowing when they say that they're going to use the border and the immigration to get into these countries, and you knowingly allow it to stay freely open. Over here debating one, if I want to play this one clip. Actually, a couple clips I'm debating. I really want to get that far into this. I'm going to get into this one. And I wanted to get into this. This is a clip that was posted by We Are Change, June of 2014. Actually, I'm not going to play this one, but I want people to go watch it. And it's ISIS, the start of World War III with David Icke. And I urge people go watch this. And I think it will shock you. It just amazes me when I rewatch some of these older videos, and even though some of us have had a little bit different view, we've basically seen this outcome coming and have predicted it. And even though we didn't have some type of, attack here in America, we seen it over in Paris. We knew that this immigration problem was opening the doors for this. Now, Europe, France just happened to be the first targets. We have had this issue with Mali now that the U.S. and all of them quickly actually popped up there in Mali. So French, U.S., and I forget who else was there. NATO, maybe. But I do want to get into this clip here. AMTV, all wars are bankers. Wars and Dow 20K. And we are going to see the progression of this world war through a global depression. And I really do think that is coming. We're going to, probably eventually see the rationing. We see extremely cheap gas prices right now. We go, what's going on? Well, the Saudis are pumping oil, but when world wars start to break out, where borders do get closed, where large-scale military operations beyond what we're seeing right now start going, that oil is going to kind of disappear. Well, what does that have to do with all this? Well, we're also going to see from this oil war that's been going on, they've hurt our domestic oil production because they've dropped the price so low that it's hard for our oil companies to be able to operate at these low of costs and to explore. And that's when it backfires. Rationing of oil will, gas will happen. Gas prices will be so high, and we're going to see problems. Okay, let me go ahead and get into this clip here. AMTV, Christopher Green, all wars are bankers, wars, and Dow 20K.
Why buy gold? You've probably heard these reasons before. Stock market volatility, dollar crisis, economic collapse, because we don't know what tomorrow brings. But probably the most important reason you should buy gold is for diversification. You've heard it before, but you never want to put all of your eggs. I wanted to do a short video basically instructing you on the idea, which really isn't an idea, it's just a fact, that all wars are bankers' wars. Also, I want to talk about the likelihood of Dow 20,000. And notice how global stock markets, especially here in the United States, are arguably soaring as we lead into this geopolitical conflict in world war. None of it's a coincidence. I actually think it is highly likely that we see Dow 20,000 in the not too distant future. We are just under Dow 18,000 now, just under some of the all-time highs. And keep in mind, we've had quantitative easing and 0% interest rates buffering this for years now, since 2008, 2009. I mean, the government even has the gall to tell us we're in a friggin' recovery. So we are just below the all-time highs in the Dow. I think we're at like 2,000 plus, somewhere in that ballpark in the S&P 500, 5,000 plus with the NASDAQ, big technology companies. We've seen them pretty much just go bonkers in recent months this year. How is this possible? Again, all wars are bankers' wars. They finance both sides of the war. We saw this during World War I. We saw this during World War II. We see it with more marginal wars, not marginalizing those that lost their lives or were injured, like Vietnam. And now we see this with the next geopolitical conflict, the Third World War. Wasn't it Albert Einstein that said something along the lines that the Third World War, because we will eventually use nukes, that the Fourth World War we'd fight with sticks and stones? I mean, that's pretty much what it's leading to. So I actually think it's highly likely we could see Dow 20,000 in the not too distant future. At the very least, I think we're going to get close to it. And I think this builds up into a crescendo as we approach the 2016 presidential elections. Again, the next president, whether or not it's Trump or Mr. Carson or it's Hillary Clinton, 2016 will inherit the next great war and also the next great crash. So what is the Federal Reserve going to do here? They actually got together. They met. Most people are bored by this now, but it's actually very interesting because it sets the stage for this global conflict and how it ties into moneyed interest, et cetera. They basically got together and said that the majority of the board members think it's about time to raise interest rates, even though they've talked about negative interest rates like a week or two ago, and we've had NIRP, negative interest rate policy, or ZIRP, zero interest rate policy is where we are today, but they're considering NIRP, interest rate policy, negative interest rate policy in the not too distant future. So there's a strong likelihood, and the majority of the board members tell us, at least today, even though they've changed their mind like 15 times, since 2007, 2008, since they took rates to zero, they keep saying they're going to raise, but then they don't because the macroeconomic conditions change, even though the funny money unemployment number still seems to be going lower, even though that's not a true measure of real unemployment rate. It's probably double that, if not more. The majority of the board members, this criminal privately run Federal Reserve, have suggested that they think it's about time to raise interest rates. They're selling us on the idea that we're in a recovery, but they think it's about time to bump a 25 basis points, which I actually think could happen this time around. It could happen as we approach the new year. And they'll probably do it sometime in December when they meet, as people are out, doing their holiday business. This is also another good time to enter the official war when people are celebrating with their families. They've turned off the news. They're not really paying attention. This is when the bombs start to drop. So I think it's likely we could actually see an interest rate hike. But then I think the Federal Reserve will be one and done. Because, again, all of this is going to unravel. In fact, they might even have to cut further from there. And I talked about this in a previous video. And then in addition to that, maybe institute a new round of quantitative easing. And at that point, we'll be engaged in the mother of all global conflicts, will be a war. And so the gloves are going to come off, and they're going to, create even more radical policies and cut from ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, to NIRP. I mean, this is crazy. This is absolutely ridiculous. But the moneyed interests are so excited about this, and it's why they're pumping the markets through the criminal Federal Reserve and the criminals that run these hedge funds that trade on 15-to-1 margin and basically have, in the past, we've seen this almost blown up the world. All of this, again, is leading. It's almost like, a symphony, a grand symphony is leading into a crescendo until we eventually get the mother of all collapses. And the wheels will just begin to fall off. Now, of course, nobody has a crystal ball. I certainly don't. There's a lot of prognosticators and pundits out there. But I feel strongly, and I could be wrong, but I feel strongly that we're going to see this build and build and build, and nobody's expecting that the market could get stronger. We saw an IPO today with Square, a payment system. I believe, is it Jack Dorsey? Correct me if I'm wrong. He's also one of the Twitter principals, and I think he's also CEO of Twitter, or like a standing CEO. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right now, so we see all these IPOs rushing to market. It was up like 50% today. And yet we still see oil prices in the doldrums, having crashed 50 to 60% from just about a year ago. And isn't it interesting that not a single prognosticator, not a single bank, Goldman Sachs, for instance, didn't warn any of us of a massive collapse in commodities, in oil, natural gas stocks, and commodities in general. Copper, a lot of the time, is used as a gauge for the health of the global economy, and it's kind of like a demand indicator. Nobody told us or forewarned us about this collapse. But now they're saying oil could go as low, it's like 40 right now, depending on how you measure it, WTI or Brent crude. They say it can go as low as like 20 or like 26. I mean, it's amazing. Nobody had the foresight to warn us of a massive collapse in oil, some 50 to 60%. And now they're saying that it's going to go to like, 25 or 26 or maybe even lower. Now, all of this plays into the big moneyed interests, and namely Saudi Arabia, an ally of the United States. It has to do with all these geopolitical movements occurring right now with ISIS and the Paris attacks and the Paris bombing and how they're structuring this war. Because again, the banks feed like they do off a dead carcass, or a vulture does off a dead carcass, off this tear and off these future wars, which is exactly what we're headed into. And it's why arguably the stock market here in the United States and around the world is soaring into these wars, because it's actually very bullish for the large institutional, monolithic, too big to fail banks that stole from you and I in 2008 and 2009 in the name of trillions and trillions of dollars, virtually by the barrel of a gun, as we approach war. So Saudi Arabia has completely engineered, along with the United States, these oil prices into the doldrums. That's why we've had this tremendous collapse in Brent crude and WTI. It's all engineered to basically attack Russia, to also attack Iran, as we try to push forward and structure these geopolitical movements. Now, there's also some basic economics and supply and demand issues. Of course, I'm sure a benefiting factor of all this is Saudi Arabia wants to put pressure on the fracking industry and this new technology of, people drilling for oil and gas. I'm sure that plays into a little bit, but it's not the central theme. Again, we are at war. We are at economic, geopolitical war with these countries. This is the new Cold War with countries like Russia and Iran. Even Syria strategically is a key area of interest, as they're building or trying to complete a pipeline. I believe it's coming from Qatar to transfer natural gas and oil supplies to this part of the world. Some of you are probably even more up to speed on some of these developments that I am. It's the last key to the puzzle to basically bypass Russia. Russia heavily dependent on the sale of oil. They use it to subsidize most of their economy. They need somewhere in the ballpark in the range of 100+ barrel in oil, as many of these countries do, like Iran, for example, somewhere in that ballpark, just to break even, so they can subsidize their economy and their social programs. So again, this is entirely engineered to wage war against the enemies of the United States. It's another reason oil and the movement of this very important commodity is a central theme and part of the thesis that makes up this geopolitical chess game in Syria. One of the reasons that Vladimir Putin is protecting Assad, his strategic ally, and hoping to ensure, of which he's winning the war right now, hoping to ensure that they cannot complete some of these pipelines that will basically cede power to the West and transfer that power from the rising East into the West. Now, anytime we talk about money, again, the bankers, they finance both sides of the war. Every war is a banker's war. Anytime we talk about money and the potential for these world superpowers of losing it, expect war. Expect that as the reset button. And it's exactly what's approaching. Again, follow the money, follow the paper trail, follow the economics of all of this, follow the terror propaganda, follow this nationalistic rhetoric that we now see coming from Europe and namely France as a result of these terror events, so that Western powers can push their citizens to the front lines of a brand new war to achieve their economic goals, to achieve their banker-moneyed interests. Again, these monolithic, too big to fail criminal entities, companies like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, that again robbed you virtually by the barrel of a gun in 2008 and 2009, making even more money now because they borrowed from you, but they didn't really borrow from you because they're not going to pay you back. They just stole it from you and mortgaged your children's children's future until the next great crash blows up in all of our faces. So this is where all of it's headed. I see the bubble getting much, much bigger. I think Dow 20,000 is likely. It could get even bigger than that until the next great collapse. And then the Federal Reserve, which has shot its last bullet, which really doesn't have a lot of ammo, will probably usher in another version of quantitative easing or call it something different. They may, in fact, revert from ZERP to NERP policy, from zero to negative interest rates, and then the wheels just come falling off the train. More bloodshed, more death, the economic collapse continues. We have not recovered since the collapse of 2008, 2009. It's been papered over by debt and leverage and borrowed from our children's future. And it results in war. World war, folks, is the reset button. Get this video out everywhere. Make it viral. Hard hitting in your face. I'm Christopher Green.
Christopher Green, AMTV on YouTube. This is something that we've talked about too. They will eventually raise interest rates, and the longer that they keep it going the way they are, the more of a bubble they're creating, not including the bubble being created by the Saudis pumping so much oil into the market, and a world war right at the front door and ready to bust through. And in this whole thing, he talked about commodities. Well, oil being one commodity, and there's basically a war going on there. But there's also another war by these artificially low interest rates, artificially keeping the dollar high, even though it's slipping away from being a world currency. We're seeing gold and silver prices go really low. Well, what does that mean? Well, when you see that the market would say, well, prices should be high for gold and silver. Well, it's not because of the war on the other commodities and the manipulation through the Federal Reserve. So it's artificially keeping the price on gold and silver low. A lot of wealthy people are buying up gold and silver like mad. The smart people are buying it up. And surprisingly, there's a lot of them that are raising their prices, even though the market isn't. I see a lot of, and I'm not talking about some specialty coin, but where one day they had it a silver ounce going for, I think they had it $17 one day, and the next day they had it at about 26, I think. Why are they doing that? Because they're seeing the market. They're realizing the market. Now, some people have to sell it for higher because of what they got into it. But they're not going to get that while the market's low until you start seeing it bought up, which we are seeing. We've seen it for a while now. For at least 3, 4, 5 months. It's really been getting pretty dry out there. One way you can help this broadcast and help yourself when you're looking for precious metals. If you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, it'll take you to Amagi Metals, and that's my preferred source for gold and silver. And they have pretty good prices in the market at where it's at, and they're not gouging prices. They do have some that are a little bit more because of the collector part of it. But then they do still have their ounces of silver at decent prices too. So go check them out. And that also helps out this broadcast when you purchase your precious metals through that link, antityrannynews.com/metal. Don't forget to help UCY out. If you go to ucy.tv, up at the top, you can click the Support UCY tab to donate, or scroll down to the bottom. There's also a Donate tab. But there's also a little Amazon button. If you click the Amazon button, you can shop Amazon through ucy.tv, and you get the same great deals, same great shipping prices and shipping rates. But at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback from that, so you can find all your prepping gear, all your food supplies and stuff through that. And at the same time, you're also helping out alternative media like UCY.tv that allows you to get many different views and information from all the different hosts here on UCY.tv. So don't forget to support networks like this. And you can also donate again at UCY.tv. Click the UCY support tab. Now, I had this article here out of Truth and Media. And this was Rachel Blevins. Clinton bipartisan senators push for new war powers against ISIS. And I told you this is what's going to happen. They're going to want to do more military operations, also while taking your liberties here at home, telling you, you know, one thing I do see coming out of this is a national ID card being prepared and pushed through this refugee crisis, while they're also creating destabilization here in America and in Europe. But this article here says, in the wake of recent terrorist attacks in Paris, Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton joined a bipartisan group of senators in calling for an updated authorization of military force against Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria. A possible vote on military authorization would be the first war vote in 13 years. As up until now, President Obama has used the congressional authorizations given to former President George W. Bush during the invasion of Iraq after 9/11. During a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York on Thursday, Clinton called for a new phase in the war against ISIS and said she thinks the U.S. should lead the fight. It's time to begin a new phase and intensify and broaden our efforts to smash the would-be caliphate, Clinton said. This is a worldwide fight and America must lead it. While Clinton called for the U.S. to increase its efforts to defeat ISIS, she said she does not believe ground troops will be necessary. That is just not the smart move to make here, Clinton said. If we have learned anything from the 15 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's that local people and nations have to secure their own communities. We can help them, and we should, but we cannot substitute for them. Instead, Clinton said she thinks the U.S. should send more elite commanders to work with rebel forces. We may have to give our own troops advising and training with Iraqis greater freedom of movement and flexibility, including embedding in local units and helping target airstrikes, she said. Clinton also called for a no-fly zone over Syria. We should also work with the coalition and the neighbors to impose no-fly zones that will stop Assad from slaughtering civilians. And the opposition from the air, opposition forces on the ground, with material support from the coalition, should then help create safe areas where Syrians could remain in the country rather than fleeing toward Europe, Clinton said, indicating support for arming Sunni and Kurdish fighters. Clinton said that Baghdad needs to accept, even embrace, arming Sunni and Kurdish forces in the war against ISIS. But if Baghdad won't do that, the coalition should do so directly. The Kurdish forces, the ones that are actually taking a honest fight, and also the only groups that are taking in the Christian flee people. You know, the Kurdish people are the people that the Christians in the area flee to for help. They've been getting help. The problem is so has ISIS. That's the problem. They don't talk about, but now Clinton's comments come after the Obama administration announced that it was ending the $500 million program training and equipment moderate Syrian rebels in October after it was ultimately deemed a failure, which it was. And of course, all the war hawks are flocking, but again, it's also a catch-22. You know, we have a group out there that we help create, but I think we should take less of a role in it. Really, really do. Okay, let me get back to this other article here if I can find it. Now, this one out of Infowars.com, Rand Paul. Call for more surveillance after Paris attacks is bullshit. GOP presidential candidate Rand Paul did not mince words in a campaign stop at George Mason University, Virginia, Thursday, labeling a call for increased government surveillance as bullshit. So when they stand up on television and say the tragedy in Paris means you have to give up your liberty, we need more phone surveillance, bullshit, Paul told a crowded students who enthusiastically cheered. And we'll play this small clip here.
When they stand up on television and says the tragedy in Paris means you have to give up your liberty, we need more phone surveillance. Bullshit. Are you allowed to use profanity? Is that part of the... Are we in the free speech zone? But here's the thing is, they are collecting your phone records as we speak. They did not miss a beat. And even though we voted on reform, all of your phone records are still being collected and stored in Utah. Did it stop the attack in Paris? Not one iota.
Now, you think that the collection part's a problem? They are going to also use this here in America to go after your guns and your First Amendment. We were talking about Hillary just a couple articles ago, and something interesting about her and free speech. She does not care. The Clintons have always been those type of people that would do what they needed to do to shut up opposition. They're always going after opposition and threatening and trying to shut them up. Michael Krager, Liberty Blitzkrieg, Hillary Clinton needs a safe space. Aides demand comedy club remove video making fun of her. The one upside of Hillary Clinton becoming president is that her endless stream of stupidity will result in more content for this writer than I could ever imagine. Hot off her recent debate performance in which she claimed that the reason she is owned by Wall Street is because of 9/11, her aides are now demanding a Hollywood comedy club take down a video of comedians mocking her. Just in case you have any doubt about what a Hillary presidency would look like, we learned from Judicial Watch in what appears to be the first for a serious presidential contender, Hillary Clinton's campaign is going after 5 comedians who made fun of the former Secretary of State in stand-up skits at a popular Hollywood comedy club. A video of the short performance, which is less than 3 minutes, is posted on the website of the renowned club Laugh Factory, and the Clinton campaign has tried to censor it. Besides demanding that the video be taken down, the Clinton campaign has demanded the personal contact information of the performers that appeared in the recording. This is no laughing matter for the club owner, Jamie Masada, a comedy guru who opened Laugh Factory more than 3 decades ago and has been instrumental in laughing the careers of many famous comics. They threatened me, Masada told Judicial Watch. I've received complaints before, but never a call like this threatening to put me out of business if I don't cut the video. Masada told Judicial Watch that as soon as the video got posted on the Laugh Factory website, he received a phone call from a prominent person inside the Clintons' campaign. He said the video was disgusting and asked who put me up to this, Masada said. The Clinton staffer, who Masada did not want to identify, also demanded to know the names and phone numbers of the comedians that appear in the video. Masada refused and hung up. Instead, insists the comedy stage is a sanctuary for freedom of speech, no matter who is offended. Just last night, we had Emmy Award winner Dana Carvey doing Donald Trump, and it was hilarious, Masada said. And let me see. I'm going to play this short clip here.
some political faces in the room watching the stand-up show. I knew this was going down because I saw the Secret Service outside.
She's here? Let me finish that thought. That woman should be president of the United States. Because she knows what it's like to like men and love women.
You know what I would love, Hillary? I was thinking about it, and I would love if you become president, then you divorce Bill, and then you marry a bitch. Oh, shit. That would fuck the world up in their head. That would be like, is this an episode of Tyler Perry's If Loving You Is Wrong? What is this? What is happening in the tabloids? Oh my, it would be so turned up. It would be crazy. It would be amazing.
So that's a little snippet of the clip that they posted, and you can find that clip at the Laugh Factory. But yeah, nope. Clinton doesn't like when you make fun of her, and her staffers are going to call you and try to shut you up, threaten you. And this is that mentality that comes out of those type of people. And it's funny because they have created a situation where now they have people that were influenced by that ideology that came from that are going to eat people like Hillary Clinton alive. And the radicals on both sides will take power of these parties if you don't watch it. And they're already starting. The radicals on the left are Hillary Clinton. She, is not someone that most of us agree with. Basically, almost all of us don't agree with, what type of ideology and government she wants to create. But she's not the worst of them. And they're going to be usurped by the even more radicals. And when you look at Donald Trump, he actually taps into some of that extremism on the right side. Whether he's intending to or, you can make all those arguments all you want. But a lot of people would try to claim that Ron Paul tapped into the white supremacies. Well, no, but Donald Trump definitely is. Whenever you have freedom, of course you're going to have one. You'll have groups go, yeah, we want government to go away so we can be the proxy government, basically. They don't understand that being against, this centralized control means we don't want mob groups running around trying to control population. So they miss it. But what Donald Trump calls for is more this nationalism that can also lead to that fascism and authoritarianism. And with what government is at this point, do you really want someone like that furthering that type of agenda? Because it will push the left even harder. And then if they get control, they're going to push it even farther. We're going to have a problem. And I think history has been proving that. Now, I want to play this short clip here from We Are Change. American journalist murdered by Western ally for exposing ISIS. We Are Change on YouTube, wearechange.org.
This is Gradowski of WeAreChange.org here in Lima, Peru, and I wanted to bring your attention to a very important, underreported story that the White House is being extremely silent on. It's the story about an American journalist who was disappeared and murdered in Turkey on October 19th, 2014. Her name was Serena Shim. She was an American journalist working for Press TV inside of Turkey, and she uncovered how United Nations World Food Program trucks were being used by ISIS to send in and import weapons and other supplies to the Syrian rebels. The story had huge repercussions for the U.S. ally Turkey. Right after her reporting, Serena talked about death threats and threats from Turkish intelligence she got right after her report. Turkish intelligence, days before she died, accused her of being a spy, questioned her contacts and friends, and said that she would be arrested on sight when they found her. On October 19, 2014, Serena was driving on a one-way, three-lane highway with a medium. A cement truck hit her car head-on. The Turkish government says that this was an accident and has not provided any evidence or photos of the actual incident, and they have actually been changing their stories of what actually happened to Serena. After the accident, it was reported that Serena and another driver were alive. The other driver was taken to a hospital while Serena was taken to an undisclosed location where 30 minutes later she was found in a hospital dead from heart failure. The family went to Turkey to get answers from the Turkish government, and they have not gotten any assistance or help from that government. The United States government, when questioned about Serena Shim, said that they do not investigate deaths of Americans in other countries, even though they have done so in the past. The Turkish government, for some reason, posted her passport online after her death. The family does not believe her death was an accident in any way, shape, or form. The mainstream media inside the United States has been completely silent. The White House has been completely silent. The government is giving no answers and will not investigate the death of this American brave journalist who is investigating and exposing the very fact that our ally is helping, aiding, and supporting ISIS. The family and other people who knew Serena took online and actually have started a petition on change.org, so the United States has to officially investigate the death of Serena Shim. Google and Twitter, according to many people, are censoring the hashtag Serena Shim. And obviously, from all the reports that we have done throughout 2 years almost now, the United States and its allies have been supporting the rise of not only extremist Islamists in Syria, but they have been directly funding, supporting, and training them to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. It is a well-known fact. Even other acclaimed journalists are pointing out the fact that Anonymous is doing more to fight ISIS than Barack Obama himself. Anonymous has actually started an operation to help Serena. And right now, they're actually launching another operation to go after ISIS and their social media accounts that they're using to recruit other members to join in their cause. As we know, ISIS leaders before admitted even being funded by Barack Obama because it's a continuation of the military-industrial complex that has no end. Obviously, Serena was an extremely brave, selfless human being who sacrificed her life because she believed that the world could be a better place with honest and real reporting. Her very country, the establishment, are shunning her, ignoring her, because she exposed facts, the truth to you that they want to keep secret. Let's make sure we don't forget about Serena. She was 29 years old. I resonate with her because I would have done the same thing that she did. I got an offer to go to Turkey just a day ago. Let's make sure that when this happens, that we get the message out and that we won't be silent about this extremely important human being that sacrificed everything to bring you the truth. Thank you again so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this fully independent, fully funded by you news organization, We Are Change. Thank you.
WeAreChange.org. We Are Change on YouTube. Now, sorry, let's try to get these articles up here. A Pew poll, just to let you know, 40% of millennials support government limiting speech offensive to minorities. So it's up to 40% with millennials. Great. Okay, this article does not want to come up here. Come on. Come on. Sorry about this. Okay, here it's starting to go now. Satellite war is the new arms race in space. This one out at FT.com, FT magazine. Satellite wars. A new arms race in our skies threatens the satellites that control everything from security to communications. And I think we're going to see deliberate fighting on that, where we'll see satellites launched knowing that they're not going to survive, probably with a lot less of needed technology in them, just to get the space. And it also come down to our security here at home. If we get into a world war, how much of this is really dependent on a lot of satellites? And unlikely memorial runs across the middle of the marketplace in Kettering, and otherwise a markable English market town. The slab of granite set into the paving as part of a timeline of local history reads, Russian satellites grammar school beats NASA. Etched into the stone is the distinctive outline of a Sputnik orbiter. Kettering Grammar School, like the space race, is long gone, but for a period it was on the front line of the extraterrestrial battle between Washington and Moscow. The Kettering group, the school's enthusiastic science masters and their eager pupils, became the world's foremost amateur satellite sleuths, tracking secret Soviet launches and uncovering the location of a previously secret Russian cosmodrome from the Workaday Shire town. As the Cold War passed into history, so did the group. Geoff Perry, the main teacher and leader, died in 2000, but some of his former pupils never lost their enthusiasm for tracking the orbits of satellites in the skies above us. In 2014, an email from one of them hit my inbox. Did I know much about satellites? I asked. Perhaps I should look into this curious new object. In May 2014, there was a regular Russian rocket launch that put 4 satellites up into orbit, recalls Bob Christie, a former catering pupil. But one of them wasn't the same as the others 3 had been publicly declared were Robnik communication satellites. The 4th, though, was something quite else. Officially, it was classified on the Pentagon's public space database as orbital junk. But then it began to maneuver. It moved away from others, says Christie. And then we watched it put itself on a trajectory to catch up again with the rocket booster that launched it. It was some kind of test. What exactly NORAD 39765, known as Cosmos 2499 and Object 2014-28E, is still not been publicly declared. The Russians do not even acknowledge its existence, but the activities of the Mystery Ghost satellite have given many of the defense and intelligence community pause for thought. In the last year, the Russians, China, and the U.S. have all been testing these kinds of things, says Christie. People talk about them being inspectors, but if you have the ability to maneuver up to another satellite in space to inspect it, you also have the ability to destroy it. Indeed, as far as several seasoned analysts, intelligence officials, and diplomats spoken to by the Financial Times are concerned, 39765 best makes sense in the context of one of Russia's most secretive Cold War ventures, a program that is now being revived, Instrumental Sputnikov, the satellite killer. Space military officials like to say is the ultimate higher ground. Since the Cold War ended, however, it has been a largely uncontested territory. In January 1967, the U.S. and U.K. and USSR became the first signatories to the Outer Space Treaty. In it, they committed to keeping the moon free of military testing and not putting weapons of mass destruction into orbit. China joined the pact in 1984. Another 100 states are now signed up. As a result, for 3 decades, space powers have been able to operate their own satellites with impunity. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, there are at least 1,300 satellites now orbiting Earth. Some have military purposes, some are for civilian and commercial use. Most, 549, are American. European powers are big players too. Russia has 131, the UK 40, but growing numbers are from rising countries. China now has 142 in orbit, India 33. With all this activity, the Pax Salutatus are unlikely to hold for much longer. 60 years after the space race began, an orbital arms race is again in development. Military officials from the U.S., Europe, and Asia, spoken to by Financial Times, confirmed in private what the Catering Group and other amateur stargazers have been watching publicly. Almost every year, a country with strategically important satellite constellations and its own launch facilities is considering how to defend and weaponize their extraterrestrial assets. I don't think there is a single G7 nation that isn't now looking at space security as one of its highest military priorities. And areas of strategic concern, says one senior European intelligence official. The threat is increasing and is a major concern, says Frank Rose, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control. Both Russia and China are developing ASAT anti-satellite weapon capabilities to hold U.S. systems at risk. Now we don't believe it's in anyone's interest to engage in a space arms race. We don't want conflict in outer space, but be assured we will be able to operate in a degraded space environment. We've made it clear that we will do what is necessary to protect the space assets of the U.S. and our allies against potential attack. Satellites are fragile things. A nudge to their orbit, a tilt of their solar panels towards the sun, a laser blast directed at their sensors, or a projectile casually fired into their path are all capable of wreaking permanent, irreversible damage. We have plenty of vulnerabilities we need to work on, and space is one of the most important, says General Dennis Mercer, NATO Supreme Commander who is charged with adapting the alliance to deal with future threats. It's a domain that is going to be as important in modern warfare as any other. We have a responsibility and necessity to work on it. You think they're feeling a little threatened by the countries that are now emerging, like Russia and China? It says here, Space says Mercer needs to be considered in the same breath as sea and air when it comes to defense. While developed societies are becoming more dependent on it than ever before for almost every aspect of their digital economies, their grip on the technologies has given them global strategic dominance is slipping, and as more countries around the world look to maximize their military advantages, space is becoming the most obvious domain to contest. This is going to explode in the very near future. You already have 60 plus nations who are interested in space capabilities, says Elizabeth Quintana, senior research fellow at the military think tank RUSI. And with that, there are a number that are developing very serious anti-space capabilities, most notably China and Russia. When you think that Western militaries and societies are critically dependent on space, it is an area to be seriously concerned about. Everything that gives modern Western forces their technological and tactical edge over rivals, notes Quintana, stems from space-based systems. These include precision weaponry, drone surveillance, and sophisticated real-time battlefield communications. Even our tanks, one British military officer says, depend on our satellites. The Reaper drones that destroyed al-Qaeda's leadership would have been useless without satellites. Intelligence on Russian troop movements around Ukraine came from them, and the smart bombs that reduced Saddam Hussein's military to rubble in 48 hours would have hit their targets wouldn't have hit their targets had it been there, if they hadn't been there. Even Barack Obama's phone calls rely on a specific array of them, the advanced extremely high frequency constellation. But it is not just a military issue. Space, cyber, hybrid warfare, they raise questions of our resilience, says Mercer. And resilience, he adds, is something that societies, not just armies, need to address. Western intelligence officials can reel off their concerns over the loss of satellite communications could mean. There are all things we are currently depend on, from the navigation of airplanes to our ability to make phone calls, and then they are the things we are becoming ever more dependent on: driverless cars or internet-linked domestic appliances. In the U.S., for the military, particularly the Air Force and DARPA, the National Security Agency, and the State Department, this is now a key area of concern, says Anthony Kordsman, former Pentagon intelligence chief and now chair of strategy at the think tank CSIS in Washington. But the challenge in space is going to affect virtually every aspect of the country's strategy. The absolutely critical point is that in a world where geoeconomics are as important as geopolitics and strategy, we need to worry about the spectrum of vulnerability. This is not just military assets that space is a problem for, but our entire societies. Think about it. If everybody woke up tomorrow, phones didn't work, internet didn't work, major networks are down, people would freak the hell out. I'm telling you, people would freak the hell out. And most people don't have a clue. They don't know what to do, where to go, how to prepare. They haven't been preparing. They haven't done anything to prepare for any type of catastrophe, even though many alternative outlets are constantly warning you, always be prepared for these type of circumstances, because we're showing you all the bubbles that they're creating, military, globally, economically, and civil liberty. There are things that you need to do to prepare. And I really think that we are on the brink of World War III. Some people call it World War IV if you consider the Cold War a war, or the war on communism, which include the Cold War and into Vietnam and North Korea. But I still go, we're looking at World War III coming, whatever you want to call it. But how is it going to be fought? Well, eventually it'll be fought every way possible, but they're hurting us financially first. Remember, one thing I said, they've been hoarding gold. They flaunt that they have all this gold. Well, we kind of go, yeah, there's gold in Fort Knox. Yeah. Stop asking stupid questions. Yeah. Why are you even bringing that up? When we have European countries trying to repatriate their gold, and we go, yeah, we'll get it back to you, but it's probably going to take us about 7 to 10 years. that doesn't make you feel confident, really, that there's going to be any gold if they open the vaults. Then you look at our national debt. If they have gold, would they not give it up to go towards that? You don't really hear people calling for what Iceland did in the United States, where you get rid of most of your debt by proving it to be illegitimate. Improper. Charge the people that were complicit in doing this. Expose the corruption. You know, we always hear about how little people it takes to start a revolution. I think we're close to that, but I think we also live in different times. This isn't, muzzle loader era. We have a issue where we need to get the philosophy of freedom and liberty, personal responsibility, less government, and ideas kind of like the non-aggression principle, anarcho-capitalism type deal, and wake up more people globally. Because the more and more this becomes a global centralizing of power, the more we need a global awakening, not American awakening. I think the Constitution, in ways, could be a great stepping stone, a tool used to decentralize a lot of countries. Again, I don't look at the Constitution as an end-all. I don't think you get to a constitutional government the way we're told it's supposed to be by the right and say, now we're perfect. Now we don't have to become freer. I think that would be a large mistake, and we got to go somewhere. So if we can't be freer, then we're eventually just going to get back to where we are now. Thank you all for tuning in. I know we are coming up to the end of the broadcast here. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv, and don't forget to go to UCY.tv. Click that support tab, or even shop through Amazon. If you scroll down to the bottom, click the Amazon button. Check out. Take care.